Hi everyone, today we're going to be reading the second part of chapter 4 in Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Thanks for joining us today. We are here at the Caribou Public Library and I'm Miss Erin. So glad that you're able to be with us for our chapter book story time. All right, so we had already read the first half of chapter 4 where it talked about Meg and Joe and then Beth, and now we're on to Amy. If anybody had asked Amy what the greatest trial of her life was, she would have answered at once, "My nose." When she was a baby, Joe had accidentally dropped her into the coal hod, and Amy insisted that the fall had ruined her nose forever. It was not big or red, nor poor Petria's, or like poor Petria's. It was only rather flat, and all the pinching in the world could not give it an aristocratic point. No one minded it but herself, and it was doing its best to grow. But Amy felt deeply the want of a Grecian nose, and drew whole sheets of handsome ones to console herself. Little Raphael, as her sisters called her, had a decided talent for drawing, and was never so happy as when copying flowers, designing fairies, or illustrating stories with queer specimens of art. Her teachers complained that instead of doing her sums, she covered her slate with animals. The blank pages of her atlas were used to copy maps on, and caricatures of the most ludicrous description came fluttering out of all her books at unlucky moments. She got through her lessons as well as she could, and managed to escape reprimands by being a model of deportment. She was a great favorite with her mates, being good-tempered and possessing the happy art of pleasing without effort. Her little airs and graces were much admired, so were her accomplishments, for beside her drawing, she could play 12 tunes, crochet, and read French without mispronouncing more than 2/3 of the words. She had a plaintive way of saying, "When Papa was rich, we did so-and-so," which was very touching, and her long words were considered perfectly elegant by the girls. Amy was in a fair way to be spoiled, for everyone petted her, and her small vanities and selfishnesses were growing nicely. One thing, however, rather quenched the vanities. She had to wear her cousin's clothes. Now Florence's mamma hadn't a particle of taste, and Amy suffered deeply at having to wear a red instead of a blue bonnet, unbecoming gowns and fussy aprons that did not fit. Everything was good, well made, and a little worn. But Amy's artistic eyes were much afflicted, especially this winter when her school dress was a dull purple with yellow dots and no trimming. "My only comfort," she said to Meg with tears in her eyes, is that mother don't take tucks in my dresses whenever I'm naughty, as Maria Parks's mother does. My dear, it's really dreadful, for sometimes she is so bad her frock is up to her knees, and she can't come to school. When I think of this degradation, I feel that I can bear even my flat nose and purple gown with yellow skyrockets on it." Meg was Amy's confidant and monitor, and by some strange attraction of opposites, Joe was gentle Beth's. To Joe alone did the shy child tell her thoughts, and over her big harum-scarum sister, Beth consciously or unconsciously exercised more influence than anyone in the family. The two older girls were a great deal to each other, but both took one of the younger into their keeping and watched over them in their own way, playing mother, as they called it, and put their sisters in the places of discarded dolls, with the maternal instinct of Little Women. "Has anybody got anything to tell? It's been such a dismal day that I'm really dying for some amusement," said Meg, as they sat sewing together that evening. "I had a queer time with Aunt today, and as I got the best of it, I'll tell you about it," began Joe, who dearly loved to tell stories. "I was reading that everlasting Belsham and droning away, as I always do, for Aunt soon drops off, and then I take out some nice books and read like fury until she wakes up. I actually made myself sleepy, and before she began to nod, I gave such a gape that she asked me what I meant by opening my mouth wide enough to take the whole book in at once. I wish I could and be done with it," said I, trying not to be saucy. Then she gave me a long lecture on my sins and told me to sit and think them over while she just lost herself for a moment. She never finds herself very soon, so the minute her cap began to bob, like a top-heavy dahlia, I whipped the Vicar of Wakefield out of my pocket and read away with one eye on him and one on Aunt. I just got to where they all tumbled into the water when I forgot and laughed out loud. Aunt woke up and, being more good-natured after her nap, told me to read a bit and show what frivolous work I preferred to the worthy and instructive Belsham. I did my very best, and she liked it, though she only said, "I don't understand what it's all about. Go back and begin it, child." Back I went, and made the primroses as interesting as ever I could. Once I was wicked enough to stop in a thrilling place and say meekly, "I'm afraid it tires you, ma'am. Shan't I stop now?" She caught up her knitting, which had dropped out of her hands, gave me a sharp look through her specs, and said in her short way, "Finish the chapter and don't be impertinent, miss." Did she own that she liked it?" asked Meg. "Oh, bless you, no. But she let old Belsham rest, and when I ran back after my gloves this afternoon, there she was, so hard at the vicar that she didn't hear me laugh as I danced a jig in the hall, because of the good time coming. What a pleasant life she might have, if only she chose. I don't envy her much, in spite of her money, after all rich people have about as many worries as poor ones, I guess," added Joe. "That reminds me," said Meg, "that I've got something to tell. It isn't funny like Joe's story, but I thought about it a good deal as I came home. At the King's today, I found everybody in a flurry, and one of the children said that her oldest brother had done something dreadful, and Papa had sent him away. I heard Mrs. King crying, and Mr. King talking very loud. Grace and Ellen turned away their faces when they passed me, so I shouldn't see how red their eyes were. I didn't ask any questions, of course, but I felt so sorry for them, and was rather glad that I hadn't any wild brothers to do wicked things and disgrace the family. I think being disgraced in school is a great deal tryinger than anything bad boys can do," said Amy, shaking her head, as if her experience of life had been a deep one. "Susie Perkins came to school today with a lovely red carnelian ring. I wanted it dreadfully, and I wished I was her with all my might. Well, she drew a picture of Mr. Davis, with a monstrous nose and a hump, and the words, 'Young ladies, my eye is upon you,' coming out of his mouth in a balloon thing. We were laughing over it when all of a sudden his eye was on us, and he ordered Susie to bring up her slate. She was paralyzed with fright, but she went, and oh, what do you think he did? He took her by her ear, just fancy how horrid, and led her to the recitation platform, made her stand there half an hour holding that slate so everyone could see." "Didn't the girls shout at the picture?" asked Joe, who relished the scrape. "Laugh? No, not a one. They sat as still as mice, and Susie cried quarts. I know she did. I didn't envy her then, and I felt that millions of carnelian rings wouldn't have made me happy after that. I never should have got over such an agonizing mortification." And Amy went on with her work in the proud consciousness of virtue and the successful utterance of 2 long words in a breath. "I saw something that I liked this morning, and I meant to tell it at dinner, but I forgot," said Beth, putting Joe's topsy-turvy basket in order as she talked. "When I went to get some oysters for Hannah, Mr. Lawrence was in the fish shop, but he didn't see me, for I kept behind a barrel, and he was busy with Mr. Cutter, the fishman. A poor woman came in with a pail and a mop and asked Mr. Cutter if he would let her do some scrubbing for a bit of fish, because she hadn't any dinner for her children, and had been disappointed of a day's work. Mr. Cutter was in a hurry, and said no rather crossly, so she was going away, looking hungry and sorry, when Mr. Lawrence hooked up a big fish with the crooked end of his cane and held it out to her. She was so glad and surprised she took it right in her arms and thanked him over and over. He told her to go along and cook it, and she hurried off, so happy. Wasn't it nice of him? Oh, she did look so funny hugging the big slippery fish and hoping Mr. Lawrence's bed in heaven would be aisy." When they had laughed at Beth's story, they asked their mother for one, and after a moment's thought, she said soberly, "As I sat cutting out blue flannel jackets today at the rooms, I felt very anxious about Father, and thought how lonely and helpless we should be if anything happened to him. It was not a wise thing to do, but I kept on worrying until an old man came in with an order for some things. He sat down near me, and I began to talk to him, for he looked poor and tired and anxious. "Have you sons in the army?" I asked, for the note he brought was not to me. "Yes, ma'am. I had 4. 2 were killed. 1 is a prisoner. And I'm going to the other, who is very sick in a Washington hospital," he answered quietly. "You have done a great deal for your country, sir," I said, feeling respect now instead of pity. "Not a mite more than I ought, ma'am. I'd go myself if I was any use. As I ain't, I give my boys and give 'em free." He spoke so cheerfully, looking so sincere, and seemed to have so glad to give his all, that I was ashamed of myself. I'd given 1 man and thought it too much, while he gave 4 without grudging them. I had all my girls to comfort me at home, and his son, his last son, was waiting miles away to say goodbye to him, perhaps. I felt so rich, so happy thinking of my blessings, that I made him a nice bundle, gave him some money, and thanked him heartily for the lesson he had taught me. "Tell another story, Mother, like one with a moral to it, like this. I like to think about them afterwards, if they are real and not too preachy," said Joe after a minute's silence. Mrs. March smiled and began at once, for she had told stories to this little audience for many years and knew how to please them. "Once upon a time, there were 4 girls who had enough to eat and drink and wear, a good many comforts and pleasures, kind friends and parents who loved them dearly, and yet they were not contented." Here, the listeners stole sly looks at one another and began to sew diligently. These girls were anxious to be good and made many excellent resolutions, but somehow they did not keep them very well and were constantly saying, "If we only had this," or "if we could only do that," quite forgetting how much they already had and how many pleasant things they actually could do. So they asked an old woman what spell they could use to make them happy. And she said, "When you feel discontented, think over your blessings and be grateful." Here Joe looked up quickly, as if about to speak, but changed her mind, seeing that the story was not yet done. Being sensible girls, they decided to try her advice, and soon were surprised to see how well off they were. One discovered that money couldn't keep shame or sorry out of rich people's houses. Another, that though she was poor, she was a great deal happier with her youth, health, and good spirits than a certain fretful, feeble old lady, who couldn't enjoy her comforts. A third, that disagreeable as it was to help get dinner, it was harder still to have to go begging for it. And the fourth, that even carnelian rings were not so valuable as good behavior. So they agreed to stop complaining, to enjoy the blessings already possessed, and try to deserve them, lest they should be taken away entirely instead of increased. And I believe they were never disappointed or sorry that they took the old woman's advice. "Now, Marmee, that is very cunning of you to turn our own stories against us and give us a sermon instead of a spin," cried Meg. "I like that kind of sermon. It's the sort Father used to tell us," said Beth thoughtfully, putting the needle straight on Joe's cushion. "I don't complain nearly as much as all the others do, and I shall be more careful than ever now, for I've had warning from Susie's downfall," said Amy morally. "We needed that lesson. We won't forget it. If we do, you just say to us as old Chloe did in Uncle Tom, 'Tink of your mercies, chillin, tink of your mercies,'" added Joe, who could not for the life of her help getting a morsel of fun out of the little sermon, though she took it to heart as much as any of them. And that is the end of our chapter 4. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.